Welcome back to our next episode of Unsolved Mysteries of the Resume, Interviewing, and Your Career. I am Nancy Siegel of Solutions for the Workplace, and with me is my partner in crime, Ellen Steverson of Starting Block Career Services. During our last podcast, we talked about prepping for an interview, up to and including the work you do beforehand. But there's a few things we still need to cover about interviewing. So we're going to start with, we've got an interview date. We're getting ready to leave the house. Ellen, what is the first thing you think we need to do when we're getting ready to leave the house, or we're having one of these Zoom or other virtual interviews?
Great question, Nancy. And hello, everybody. I'm Ellen Steverson. The two things you want to keep in mind is preparation beforehand. So before you Zoom, before you walk out that house, you want to make sure you're prepared. So before you walk out of the house, hopefully you have the directions. Please do not rely on that GPS and think you're going to be able to get there in the 30 minutes allotted. So you really want to make sure you might have a map. Maybe your GPS doesn't work that day. You want to walk out of that house for an in-person interview very well prepared, maybe even the day before, had taken a drive over to make sure you really knew where it was. The virtual one, I will say, a big thing about virtual interviewing is, did you practice the technology the day before? Did you look at your lights? Did you look at the way you look on camera? What else, Nancy? There's several things we could talk about that.
Okay, so I totally agree with you about the in-person interviews. I'm a big fan of taking a test drive. You need to figure out where the nearest parking lot is. In addition, if you're going for a government interview, which of course is my area of expertise, you need to figure out what you need to get into the building. You cannot just walk into the vast majority of federal buildings. You need to expect that process to take anywhere from 10 minutes to as long as 30 minutes. There could be a line for screening. Make sure you have an appropriate ID. So that's critical. And one of the things you can do is, whoever sets up the interview, ask what you need to get into the building. And for our listeners that are government employees already, you probably know this, but it bears repeating. Your ID card may not work for a different government agency. So that's a huge prep thing.
Well, let me interrupt you there, Nancy, because that's very true in the private sector too, and most people do not think about that. You don't know when you get there, the security guard, there might be a security guard because one of the other buildings, one of the other companies, I should say, has a top secret clearance type of procedure. They're going to hold you up in that lobby. They're going to have to call that you don't understand where you're walking into. You need to prepare for that the day before, or beforehand ask. But sometimes in the public sector especially, you're asking the HR person, is there anything I need to know? But she walks into the building all day long with a security card and thinks nothing of it. She might fail to mention, oh, wait a minute, we've got security, and that's going to hold you up. So please don't think of these things as, oh, I get to the parking lot, I go to the door in 5 minutes, when it really could be much longer. Now, having said that, I'm also going to remind you, if you get into a building and you're 20 to 30 minutes early, you need to be patient and wait. Do not get there 30 minutes early, because now you're not being mindful of their time. You don't want to show up too early either.
So I agree with that, and it's a balancing act because you never know how long it's going to take to get into the buildings. And even in the private sector, there are plenty of high rises that have security, even though they don't have tenants who require it. It's kind of a habit in all of the big cities. And with COVID, if you need temperature checks and all of that kind of stuff, it's an additional time. Now, in terms of virtual, absolutely you need to check the equipment.
Before we even go on to the virtual side of it, let's stay in the whole, I'm now in a government agency, or I'm now walking into a building and I'm 30 minutes early. Keep in mind, your interview technically started in the parking lot. So as soon as you got out of that car and you are walking up to that building, if you walk by somebody, please smile, please nod, please be respectful. In a parking lot during an interview is not the time to be a parking snob and cut somebody off to get the best spot. That could be your boss that's about to, and this has happened, right, Nancy? And I even have a company that if you speed on their road, they'll fire their employees for doing that. They won't interview people. So again, if you're in a compound that you're driving up and it says 15 miles an hour, you better be doing 15 miles an hour. So as soon as you're on their property, your interview starts, right? And then the other thing I want to say is, say you're in the lobby and now you've got there too early. You can't run away, right? So what you do is when you go up to the person, you say, I'm a little early, but I want to wait patiently over here. When it's a little closer to my time, I'll come back up to you. You have to announce that you're there, but you don't have to be like, and I'm ready to be seen. In the private sector, don't kid yourself. That receptionist or administrative person, she might have more pull than anyone on the interviewing process. So if she says that man or woman or person is mean, was rude, was doing this, because they might say, what was he doing during those 30 minutes? You are on an interview. You are on a stage. Put your phone away, sit there quietly, smile, be pleasant. Right, Nancy? Is that how it is in the federal world too?
Absolutely. So a few things. Some federal buildings will not allow you to sit in the lobby and
Right.
wait. Be aware of that. And I have had people tell me, hiring managers in the federal government tell me that they have sat on the reception desk when they have interviews and walked people back just so they could get that feel for someone before they know that they're on. Totally agree with you.
And I've had hiring managers tell me that they make people wait out in the lobby just to see how the person will demonstrate their ability to handle pressure, their ability to be flexible, their ability to be kind under a different situation. Don't think that some of the things that could be going on is testing you. Be mindful of your entire behavior. Don't get mad if they're making you wait 30 minutes. That's part of the interview process. So you shouldn't be getting annoyed.
But let's
Mindful.
talk a little bit about preparing for the virtual, because
right.
we've all been doing a lot of virtual stuff, but it still bears repeating. Like you said, you should absolutely test the system ahead of time. So there's so many different systems. There is, of course, Zoom, there's WebEx, there's Join Me, there's Adobe Connect, there's video teleconferencing.
Mm-hmm.
They all work similarly, but not identically.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to practice getting on and getting on smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
You want to check your lighting. So bright light should not be behind you, because if the bright light is behind you, no one can see your face.
Mm-hmm.
You want lights in front of you, and see what they look like on camera. Make sure that your webcam is at a reasonable level. And it's when you can see people on the screen, our natural inclination as humans is to look at their faces. But the reality is you should be looking at the camera. And that feels very unnatural when you can see faces. What I do is next to my webcam, I have a yellow sticky and I have drawn an eyeball on it. So that reminds me to stare at that yellow sticky and the camera rather than on the faces, which are, of course, way more appealing.
I've told clients to tape a picture of their loved one, somebody who makes them smile, so that they remember to smile. If your computer's up against a wall, you could tape a picture of your husband, kids, dog, cat, I don't care, and stick it on the wall with some painter's tape and stick it up, and then look at that and grin, because that will make you happy and it'll make it naturally when you're talking.
So I think that's a great idea. Something else that is critical is to look behind you.
Oh, yeah.
Because the camera sees what is behind you.
Mhm.
And if you look like a slob behind you, you've got stuff piled up, people can see your dirty dishes, or worse yet, your dirty clothes. Have somebody look at you and let you know exactly what they can see,
Yeah.
because you're giving an impression.
Right. And let's not kid ourselves. If you're in your bedroom doing this and you're sitting on a bed, that's inappropriate. Okay. I've had people do interviews and then they didn't get the offer. They come for coaching. I'm like, well, where did you do the interview? They're like, I was sitting on my bed. That's not appropriate to be sitting on your bed. Again, a lot of people have books behind them. They're going to zoom in and look at your books later, not maybe during the interview, but they can freeze these things too. So keep in mind, if they're recording you, they can go back and pause it and zoom in. So if you have some political books back there or whatever, they can look at those things. So just be very mindful that you want it to be very clean, very sparse. If you can get a chair in a corner and put a little TV tray in front of you and put some books to get it the right height, you have to do these types of things. Juggle it. Get it
Right.
perfect.
And if you don't have a laptop or a desktop and you are using your telephone to speak, you want to make sure you elevate it, because if you put your telephone underneath you on a table, what are people going to be seeing? They're going to be looking up your nostrils.
Right.
I have
Absolutely.
seen way too many nostrils in my life, and it's not a particularly pretty sight. So let's shift gears
Wait,
to,
before we do that though, what else do we need to tell them? They need to come to these virtual interviews fully dressed.
I was just headed
Oh,
there.
oh, good. I was worried there because your whole, I don't like looking up people's noses reminded me, I don't like to look at people's, when they bend over what I see. So come fully dressed.
Yes. So first we can talk about in-person interviews. Some people are still doing them. You want
That's
to be
right.
professional, okay? It's not a cocktail party. And even if you are interviewing in your office for the next level up and your office is casual, you want to step it up a notch for your interview to respect the process.
I agree with you 100%. I get asked that all the time. Like, I see in their bio, they're in a golf shirt. Can I just wear a golf shirt? I don't think you can really be, if you know it's a professional building and a professional job, you really, by wearing a jacket and a tie, can't be overdressed. If you're a woman putting on a blazer, you want to look like a business person. You really can't overdress, in my opinion, unless you're wearing a ball gown. So professionalism all the way. And a lot of people are out there making these comments like, and you even see commercials. I saw a commercial the other day where the woman's only dressed from her waist up and goes outside and has her pajama pants on. I have had clients be interviewed, been asked to stand up. I would like to see what you're wearing. That's a total different level of thinking. I came prepared, I'm dressed fully, rather than, I'll only do half up.
Yeah, so for virtual, I totally agree with you. And even if the interview is a phone interview, the government does a lot of phone interviews. I still recommend that you dress as you would for an interview professionally. And I also recommend for phone interviews that you stand up during the phone interview because you project better. I think for virtual interviews, no jewelry, because things clank on these microphones.
Well, I think that's true for in-person and virtual. If you're wearing something dangling and this is for men and women. I've seen men wear watches and then they have like an ID bracelet or some type of, bracelet on top of it. And every time they move it, it's clanking. So anything that makes noise, big earrings, anything, leave it off. Just don't do that. And the same, obviously, with the cell phones. Do we need to say it? We're going to say it. They're turned off. They're not even in the room, maybe, or not even in person. Leave it out in your car if you have to. So anything that can disrupt an interview, plan on it doing it, and then eliminate that.
Right. And on the virtual ones, turn off your cell phone unless you're using it for the interview. clear your desk or wherever you're doing the interview so you don't pick up stuff and start fidgeting. You also want to make sure that if your dogs and children are out of the house or wherever it is you're doing the interview, because you are making a personal, professional impression, and you want to make sure that it's the right thing.
And we've definitely beaten up the whole lighting. You know, you really want to make sure your lighting's good. And Nancy did a great job of saying put it in front of you instead of behind you, and why. But I would also argue do not have a light above you, a ceiling fan on with the light on. I've seen it where people look like their head's glowing because as the fan is rotating, it's making the light bounce off the person's head and they literally look like their head is glowing. And it's funny. I mean, and of course you can't help but laugh. You really want to make sure lighting's perfect.
So is there anything in particular that you recommend people bring with them to the interview?
So I like to teach people to have a portfolio and get them at Staples or wherever. They're usually about $20 and it's the fake leather. You can buy a more expensive one, obviously, with real leather, but it's you open it up and on one side there's a tablet and on the other side is a flap so you can put your resumes in there, and then in the middle you can hold a pen. You do want to bring several copies of your resume. Typically, I recommend 3 to 5, and you're going to paper clip them. You don't staple them. Companies like to sometimes pull them apart and lay them down separate, so you don't staple a resume. When you walk through the door, you're holding that portfolio. You take the resume out and you hand it to somebody. Even if they say, oh, I've already got a copy of it, you just said to them, hey, I came prepared. So those, the portfolio and all that good stuff is what I recommend.
So on the government side of things, the interviewers are not supposed to accept any documents because you have already applied. And technically, if they accept new documents from you, they have to go back and ask everyone else for new documents. I do strongly agree that people should walk in with a portfolio, with a pen or two, and not having to search through their pockets or their handbags or their briefcases. All of that stuff, in my view, should remain in your car. But I encourage people, even though they shouldn't take it on the government side, I encourage people to bring a reference page and to try and leave that at the end of the interview. You can have your resume too. A lot of people in the government, because the government resumes are so long, they want to bring a private sector resume that's a page or two and hand that so the interviewers have something shorter to look through.
Do they accept that or do they say no?
They should not accept it. Can I speak for every one of them? No, of course I can't, but they shouldn't.
Well, let me ask you something, though. I'm just curious. Could I at least say to you, I brought my resume or I brought my civilian or private sector resume in case you would like to look at it. Would you like to? This way, you're still saying, I'm prepared. I have something for you. And then they could say, sure, go ahead and hand it to me. Or, no, I'm not allowed to do that. But either way, it's a win-win for me because now they know I came prepared. Is that a possibility?
It's always a possibility. To me, the reference page, because nobody's putting references on their resume, leaving people with a reference page, I think is kind of a compromise, a win-win.
Well, and that's a good point from what to leave behind on the federal side, which I didn't know. I didn't know that they're not allowed to leave anything or give them something. However, in the private sector, there's several products or several things that people are now starting to do. One, bring your references just in case they ask, or you could say at the end, I have them. Or there's a 30, 60, 90-day plan, which is too involved to really get into. But again, it's something you're leaving with them that says, this is what I'm going to do my first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and so forth. Depending on your industry or what you're doing, there could be something you want to leave with them. Just quickly give it to somebody and mindful on how to do that. The reason in a private sector you want to have multiple copies of your resume, though, is because if you're having a really good interview, you never know. They could say, this is going really well. Let me grab my partner and see if he's willing to come in and talk to you right now instead of you coming back next week. That can happen. So when that person joins the room, or better yet, before he joins, you should ask, I brought an extra copy of my resume. Should I give it to him? Now, if it's somebody that's equal or above, he might say, yes, give it to him. If it's a colleague or a peer or a subordinate that you might be above, he might say, no, don't share your resume. So that's why there's multiple scenarios that could happen in an interview and why you should carry more than one copy.
Mm-hmm. So I've never heard of that happening on a federal interview, but I haven't been everywhere. So
Right?
I guess it is theoretically possible and kind of underscores your point. Okay, so when we're done with the interview, should we just say, thanks, I'm out of here? What do you think the good way to conclude an interview is?
So obviously the best way, which we mentioned in the last podcast, is to end with what is the next step, so you know. So now you know you're leaving. You do still want to send a thank you. Now, if you have terrible penmanship and you don't know how to write well, a thank you note handwritten and mailed is probably not the best route. And even if you want to do a thank you handwritten note, please still do an email. So to me, you do need to send an email out. Please don't do it from your car in the parking lot because you want to get it done. You want to take time to think about the interview, and it's a very personal email. So something like, I appreciate you being generous with your time today. I was very excited to hear about XYZ project, and here's how I can contribute to that project. You still, every time you're communicating, want to show the business value you bring to the job. You just shooting these off in the parking lot. I've even had people say, oh, I write my thank you card ahead of time. I just leave it with the receptionist. That just shows you didn't give any thought to what was just said. So thank you is still expected, and the rule of thumb is typically within 24 hours. And let me just add, in today's world where we're all connected to our phones, please don't send them out at 10 o'clock at night anymore. You know, before, when people weren't connected to a phone and you were just emailing them, we could all do it after hours. But really, you want to do it between 8 and 5 business hours.
So let me say a couple of things about that on the federal side. I'm a huge fan of thank you notes. But before we get to the thank you note, when you're leaving or finishing an interview, I think it's appropriate to close the interview and ask for the job. Now, not beg, I really want this job, but I thank you for your time, either in person or virtually. I'm even more interested in this job now than I was before. I hope I have the opportunity to join your team, or I look forward to the next steps in this process. You need to do the ask. Now, thank you notes. In the government, nothing is snail mailed. So you absolutely, positively do not want to do a handwritten thank you note, as much as it pains my heart to say that. You should do an email, and I agree with you. Your email should be no longer than 3 paragraphs. Thank you for taking the time. Second paragraph can be, as you suggested, I've been thinking about this project. Here's how I can contribute. Or, I was thinking about my response to this question, and I want to add to my response.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we didn't get to this at all, but here's one other thing I want you to think about. A sentence or two for that second paragraph. And then the third paragraph, again, I look forward to next steps. Now, since most of the government interviews are panel interviews, I am often asked, do I need to write to everyone on the panel? Or can my email say the same thing? Mm-hmm. And my recommendation, and I don't know how you feel about this, but my recommendation is everybody should get an individual email to say thank you, and they should all be slightly different.
I totally agree with you on that. as soon as the Zoom meeting's over, just like as soon as the in-person one's over, that tablet you're bringing or that pad, write down notes in the parking lot so you remember, okay, I got to talk to this one about that. And that's how you write individual notes to these people. Make them they don't have to be word for word different, but slightly different.
Right. Absolutely. And I agree with you within 24 hours. And I think it sets the tone. I'm not going to be bothering you at 2:00 in the morning just because I can't sleep.
And you know,
Right?
that is very true. I had somebody say that to me once. I got emailed at like midnight and I was wondering if that's how they would treat me as an employee. So that's a good point, Nancy. That's business hours.
Right. A couple of other things I think you should do after the interview. If there are follow-up things you need to do, obviously write them down. If there's deadlines, you're supposed to call on such and such a date, write that down. But I would also encourage every interviewee after the interview to write down the questions you were asked. Think about what you answered well. Think about the answers that you blew. Think about the questions that never occurred to you. And really do kind of a self-assessment after the interview for things that you need to work on. Because none of us are perfect, despite all the people that have told me, oh, if I can just get the interview, I get the job. I've gotten every job I've interviewed for. And I always want to respond, well, then you haven't interviewed for very many jobs.
All of that advice is perfect for the private industry. And I'd even go one step further. I actually had a client one time that was told he had to take a drug test. He didn't ask when or where or anything like that. No, he knew where. They told him where. But nobody told him really when. So he didn't bother to go. And in like 3 days, they called him up and said, you're out of the running. We're done with you. And he was like, what are you talking about? I still got to go do my drug test. They said, you had to do it in 24 hours and you didn't do it. The company gave the drug testing company his name. When he didn't show up, they notified him. And sadly, it was the mistake of a new hire on the company side who didn't tell him he had 24 hours. At least that's what he bantered with them on. And the company said, well, we're sorry if you feel like it was her fault, but our rule is if you don't do it within 24 hours, no matter what, we won't hire you. If you're being told instructions, please be mindful to say, is there a certain amount of time that I got to get this done? Ask good questions just to make sure the person giving you the information maybe isn't overworked or just new or just forgot, because we're human. So ask good questions if they're asking you to do something more so you do it correctly.
Okay. So I had a great interview. I am so pumped and I know I'm getting it. So I am so done with my job search. Yay. What would your advice be?
That is the biggest mistake ever. I don't care how much you say they loved you, you got it. Even if they say to you, we will have an offer to you by Friday, and it's Monday. I would still be applying to jobs and doing things all the way till Friday. If you get a job offer, great. You sign it, do whatever over the weekend. I still might continue to look. There are so many things that can make an offer fall through that when you stop looking, you are delaying the opportunities that are coming forward and really hurting yourself. And I can't tell you, we've been in this forever, Nancy, how many people have been hurt by one, either waiting and they never get the offer, even though they were told you're getting an offer, or they dream big and think they're getting it and still never get it, and they waste weeks and then they miss opportunities.
Absolutely. And all kinds of things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
On the government side, there could be a problem with your security clearance. There could be a government shutdown or a hiring freeze. I mean, all kinds of things happen. The contract that a private sector employer was waiting on didn't come through. There's endless variations on why something that should have happened or you thought would happen doesn't happen. I mean, you could have totally misread the situation. I tell people for government jobs take a really long time. I tell people to keep looking, keep applying, keep their private sector job, keep looking in the private sector. They should not stop till they walk in the door for their first day.
How about telling your former boss or telling your boss when you're getting ready to quit? Please, until you have your deal completely done, do not quit your current job. Because I've seen things fall through, like you're saying. Maybe they do a background check and they find something you didn't tell them about, and for whatever reason, that offer falls through. Now you've quit your job and you have no job to go to. Never quit a job, and I shouldn't say never because there are circumstances, but in most cases, 99.9% of the time, don't quit a job until you have a job that you're going to go to. I think you have to be very mindful that things happen that we can't control. And this pandemic has definitely taught us, if anything, that the rug can be pulled out from all of us. So keep looking, keep searching until you walk through the door.
Keep your resume up to date, keep your LinkedIn up to date, and prepare as if you are always searching. And on that note, we have Ellen Steverson, Starting Block Career Services, Nancy Siegel, Solutions for the Workplace. Please tune in for our next podcast on your first day at your new job.
There you go. That'll be great. We're looking forward to that one. Connect with us on LinkedIn or email us.
Or Google us.
That's right. We're there.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please visit Nancy or Ellen's website. Nancy's website is www.solutions-workplace.com, or Ellen's website is www.getyouemployed.com for additional information about our services, a free tip sheet which highlights our discussion today, and be sure to tune in to our next podcast, which will be posted soon. Thank you.